My daughter sent her mother-in-law on a Caribbean cruise and me. I stared at the photo on the screen, my finger hovering over the glass like it might burn me. Stephanie, my only child, stood on the sunlit deck, wrapped in a linen shawl, holding a champagne flute. Beside her, Janice beamed like a movie star, wearing a floppy hat and coral lipstick. To the mom who's always been there, the caption said. Bon voyage. I didn't breathe for a moment. Then the second notification buzzed. New statement, Lakewood Assisted Living. Initial placement deposit, $200. Client Marjorie Lewis. The air in the room shifted. The heater clicked. Outside, a truck backfired. I sat in silence, holding my iPad like a stranger's bad secret. She hadn't called. No text. No question. Just a bill with my name on it, and her name as responsible party. It wasn't just a message. It was a message. I walked to the kitchen, bare feet on cold tile. The smell of reheated coffee still hung in the air. I'd meant to throw it out yesterday. I hadn't. Some days, I forgot what I was saving it for. The cabinet door squeaked like always. I pulled out the tin where I kept old paper, receipts, letters, pharmacy slips from when Stephanie had strep at sips. I touched each one. My fingers were dry, knotted, but they remembered. They remembered tying shoes, writing checks for school lunch, uncapping insulin pens when my husband faded in hospice. Stephanie used to call me her safety net. Now she'd replaced me with someone easier to celebrate. Janice got the cruise deck. I got an empty recliner and a silent invoice. I sat down, hand trembling slightly. My name, Marjorie Lewis, typed in Times New Roman, under, facility placement, no color, no warmth, just legal efficiency. I thought I'd feel angry, but what I felt was hollow. The kind of hollow that echoes when you open a drawer and find only things nobody wants anymore. That's what I'd become, hadn't I? Not a person, not a mother, just a line item. I looked around my home. Yellowed walls, a faded rug, the fridge still humming. I'd lived here 42 years, brought my baby home from the hospital to that front door, and now I was being paid to leave it. I leaned forward, elbows on knees. My voice cracked the quiet. Stephanie, what did I do wrong? The first winter without Henry was the kind that crept into your bones and stayed there, snow piled high outside our little duplex on Elmsworth Street. The furnace barely worked. I'd tape plastic wrap over the windows and heat bricks in the oven to keep the bedroom warm. Stephanie was 10. Too young to lose a father. Too old to not notice everything. I'd work nights at Franklin Hospice. 12-hour shifts, most of it on my feet. When I came home, the smell of antiseptic would cling to my coat, no matter how many times I washed it. Stephanie would wrinkle her nose and say, "Smells like Band-Aids, Mom." I'd laugh and say, "Well, I am the Band-Aid lady." We made it a game. She'd time how fast I could warm up soup. I'd pretend not to see her slipping extra saltines into her coat pocket for lunch. She thought I didn't notice, but I did. The grocery budget was $38 a week. Rent was due every first. Every dollar had a name. None of them was mine. I'd tuck her in with one hand and grade her spelling quizzes with the other. Some nights, she'd fall asleep talking, her voice soft, dreaming of becoming a doctor or a vet or a poet. I used to believe I could give her any of those futures. One winter, she got bronchitis so bad I thought I'd lose her too. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, steam filling the room from the shower. I held her in my lap, rocking, humming old hymns into her damp hair. After that, I swore I'd never depend on anyone again, not even luck. That's when I started saving for the pharmacy. I cleaned nursing homes on weekends, took blood pressure readings at the senior center for $25 a shift. Every dime I made beyond the electric bill went into a coffee can labeled a Steph Arcs. It took 5 years, but I did it. I bought the corner unit on Darby and Main, painted the walls myself, hung her name on the sign like it was stitched into the sky. Ismores Lewis Pharmacy, MSS, my daughter's future in block lettering. The grand opening of the pharmacy was a Saturday in late May. It rained the night before, and everything smelled like wet mulch and lilacs. I remember wiping down the front windows 3 times that morning, even though they were already spotless. My hands were shaking too much to sit still. Stephanie wore a blue dress and flats that pinched her toes. She kept tucking her hair behind her ears, nervous. I'd never seen her that excited. A small crowd came. Neighbors, old patients from the hospice, even Father O'Hara from St. Mary's dropped by to bless the space. There were balloons tied to the railing. The ribbon across the door was cut with giant plastic scissors I'd borrowed from City Hall. We served punch and cookies on a folding table next to the vitamin shelf. Stephanie stood behind the counter, cheeks pink, handing out samples like a professional. I stood just behind her, smiling so wide my face ached. For once, everything felt earned. At the end of the day, when the last guest left, she turned to me and said, "You can take tomorrow off, Mom. I've got it from here." She meant well. But something in her tone made me pause. It was the first time I felt like help. Not a partner. Not band-aid lady. Just someone useful until no longer needed. I brushed it off. She was proud. I was tired. That was all. The next few years flew. Stephanie built a client list fast. She networked, won awards, got invited to speak at the regional pharmacy conference in Dayton. She bought a nicer car, upgraded the point of sale system. People started calling it more pharmacy. I never corrected them. Some days I worked the register, others I restocked the OTC shelves or double-checked insurance forms. But less and less, Stephanie asked me about decisions. Where to source vitamins, whether to hire a second tech, how to expand hours. I told myself she was busy. I told myself this was the plan. The truth. I'd handed her the future and slowly backed out of the frame. Not because she pushed me. Because I didn't want her to feel held back by the woman who had scrubbed the floor. And yet, lately, I wondered if I'd made it too easy to forget I helped build it at all. The first time Janice stopped by the pharmacy, she brought cupcakes, lemon with white frosting, dusted with blue sprinkles to match the logo. She joked that she'd used her secret recipe, boxed mix and extra love. Stephanie laughed. It was a light, easy kind of laugh I hadn't heard in a while. The kind that didn't ask me to join in. Janice stayed the whole afternoon, sitting behind the counter, chatting with customers like she'd been there since the beginning. She complimented the new shelving, offered tips on gift basket arrangements for the holidays. No one asked me what I thought. That week, I stopped coming in on Thursdays. The next month, Stephanie hosted a Ladies in Healthcare brunch at her house. I found out through a customer who brought it up while picking up her cholesterol meds. "She speaks so well," the woman said. "You must be proud." I was, but I hadn't known there was anything to attend. I checked my phone 3 times that night. No message. No missed call. Maybe she forgot. Maybe it was small. Maybe I wasn't needed. A few weeks later, a holiday card arrived from Stephanie and her family. There was a photo tucked inside. Janice, holding the grandkids, Stephanie and her husband smiling behind her. Everyone in white and khaki on a beach somewhere sunny. I wasn't in it. Not even a mention. The caption on the back read, "Grateful for strong women and new traditions." That one sat heavy. I kept the card in the drawer with old warranties and leftover birthday candles. Couldn't throw it out. Couldn't display it. I told myself, maybe it's her turn now. Maybe Janice gives her something I can't anymore. Still, there are different kinds of distance. Some you measure in miles, others in silence. Stephanie wasn't cruel. She was upward. Each year, she grew shinier, sleeker. Janice fit that world. She sparkled, knew which wine to bring to which fundraiser. She knew how to speak in, was, and make others feel included. Me. I still said things like, "Bless your heart," and brought casseroles in aluminum pans. There's a point where the child you raised walks forward and forgets to glance back. I didn't resent her for it. Not then. But I remember the first time I told a customer, "I'm just here part-time now. My daughter runs everything." I smiled when I said it, but my voice didn't quite believe me. Stephanie met me at the coffee shop on Broad Street. Same place we used to go when she was in college. Back then, she'd sip hot cocoa, nose buried in her organic chemistry notes, and I'd listen to her vent about professors who didn't respect women in science. Today, she ordered oat milk latte, no foam. I got black coffee. Janice showed up 5 minutes later, all scarves and perfume and breezy excuses. Hope it's okay, I tagged along. Steph said it was just a quick chat. I didn't say no. But it wasn't okay. We sat by the window. The February light was gray low. Stephanie folded her hands like she was about to deliver lab results. Mom, she began. We've been thinking a lot about what's next for you. My stomach tightened. What's next? She smiled, professional, tight. Well, you're 71, and living alone in that house. It's not sustainable long term. I took a sip. The coffee was bitter, too hot. Did I ask for help with that? No, she said quickly. It's just, well, we thought Lakewood might offer more stability, activities, meals. You wouldn't have to worry about bills or falling in the shower. I'm not falling, I said, yet. Janice jumped in, voice sweet as syrup. It's not about what you can't do, Marjorie. It's about making life simpler. Simpler. Like I was a spreadsheet needing cleanup. Stephanie nodded, relieved someone had said it. And we just want what's best. Lakewood has a great reputation, and it's close by. Well, close enough. I stared at the little crack in her nail polish. A tiny chip of red at the edge. She used to bite her nails. I remember bandaging her fingers in 3rd grade so they wouldn't bleed. You sent me a bill before sending me a sentence, I said quietly. Janice exhaled, not quite a sigh. We thought it'd be easier to show you the paperwork after we'd handled the deposit. So I wouldn't be a hassle, I said. No, Stephanie said, reaching for my hand, so you wouldn't feel overwhelmed. Her fingers were soft, warm, but my own hand stayed cold. That was when I knew. They didn't see me as a person with a say. They saw me as a decision already made. Stephanie leaned back, tone shifting. You always told me to be proactive, Mom. That's all this is. No, this was something else. It was cleaning house. And I was the pile marked donate or discard. I pulled my hand back, softly, quietly, like letting go of something already lost. Stephanie noticed. Her mouth twitched, but she said nothing. Instead, she reached for her cup and took a long sip like it would buy her time. Janice filled the silence. Marjorie, dear, when I moved into my place, I was nervous too. But within a week, I was doing yoga with women my age and having wine tastings on Thursdays. I gave a small nod. I'm glad that worked for you. She smiled. It will for you too. I turned back to Stephanie. How long have you been planning this? She blinked. Planning what? The placement. The payment. The idea that I don't belong in my own home anymore. Stephanie shifted in her seat. It's not like that. I said nothing. She sighed. Okay. A few weeks. We did a tour while you were at the doctor. Janice came with me. I wanted to be sure it felt cozy, like a sweater or a cell. You said I should downsize someday, she added, too quickly. I said someday. Not today. I thought you'd be relieved, she whispered. Mom, I've been so worried. No. Worried would have looked like showing up. Worried would have sounded like, are you okay, Mom? This felt like convenience wrapped in concern. Suddenly, a memory hit me hard. 5 years ago, Stephanie had stopped by with homemade chili and a smile too big for a Tuesday. Just need your signature real quick, Mom, she'd said. Something for the business tax stuff. My accountant says we need to update our co-ownership status. I hadn't read it closely. I was tired, trusting. She handed me a pen. And I'd signed. Now I wondered what else I'd given away without even knowing it. I stared into my coffee, its surface dark and still. Janice tapped her nails on the table. At our age, darling, it's okay to let others take the reins. At our age. That phrase curled in my gut like spoiled milk. Stephanie leaned in again. Mom, we'll help with the move. We'll make it easy. But something inside me had already gone still. Stephanie hadn't asked. She'd decided, and then framed it as kindness. I'd taught her to be decisive, to be bold. But I'd never imagined she'd use those lessons to gently erase me from my own story. I stood up, slowly. Both women looked up, blinking, surprised. "Thank you for the coffee," I said. Stephanie half rose. "Rhett, Mom, can we talk more?" I believe we just did. I left the cafe without another word, and as the door swung closed behind me, I didn't cry. Not yet. But something colder than February settled in my chest. Something that felt a lot like goodbye. The wind slapped colder than it had in weeks. I walked the 6 blocks home with no gloves, no scarf, just the thin wool coat I'd worn since Christmas. It used to be red. Now it was the color of old bricks and faded memory. The house creaked when I opened the door. The heater hummed from the hallway vent, straining like it was trying to hold everything together. I didn't turn on the lights. Didn't need them. I knew every dent in the floor. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer beneath the toaster. Receipts. Tax forms. A faded coupon for canned peaches. And then, buried under a stack of old Walgreens circulars, I found it. A file folder, blue and soft around the edges, labeled Business Docs 2019. I took it to the table, flipped it open. There it was. The document Stephanie had brought that day. She'd said it was a quick update. A technicality for the state board. Just clean up stuff, she'd called it. I'd signed while soup simmered. Now, I read the fine print for the first time. Temporary transfer of managerial control and profit authority. Effective immediately. Duration indefinite. Consent voluntary. My name was still printed near the top. Marjorie Ellen Lewis. But under ownership, there was an asterisk. And a footnote F. While retaining symbolic partnership, signatory defers all legal authority of operations and distribution to Moore Family Holdings, LLC. Symbolic. Like a memorial bench. Or a plaque on a wall nobody reads. I sat there, paper trembling in my fingers. Stephanie hadn't stolen anything. She hadn't needed to. I'd given it to her. Willingly, trustingly, as mothers do. She had simply never given it back. The worst part wasn't the paper. It was realizing she'd never planned to. I closed the folder. My hand paused on the cover. For a moment, I saw my own handwriting from years ago. Steph Arks, do not toss. I had written that when the folder still held hope. I pushed it aside, opened a second drawer, the deeper one. Inside was the deed to my house. Mortgage long paid off. Utility bills I still covered every month. My name, printed and bold, across each envelope. I still mattered, on paper at least. But what about in her world? In her world, I was already halfway packed. Pre-approved, pre-placed, pre-erased. Outside, a branch scratched the window. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. But inside my chest, there was only quiet. The kind that settles after a truth you didn't want finally speaks. I sat there, heart thudding low and steady, as if my body already knew something my mind was still catching up to. I opened my laptop. The same one Stephanie had gifted me 3 birthdays ago, still with the wallpaper of her kids at the zoo. I hadn't changed it. Not because I couldn't, but because I thought it mattered to keep them close. My fingers were stiff, but the muscle memory stayed. I logged into my bank account, the small local credit union I'd used since 1985. There was my monthly Social Security deposit, my pension from the hospice, the occasional $100 refund from overpaid utilities, but nothing from the pharmacy. Not since 2019. 4 years. 4 years of radio silence from an investment I helped build brick by brick, pill by pill. Maybe it was a fluke. Maybe there'd been a new payment system. Maybe they'd sent checks I never cashed. But hope is a thin blanket when the truth keeps blowing in. I clicked through to old tax folders in my email, opened the last 1099 form I had from the pharmacy, dated 2019, then nothing, no 2020, no 2021, no mention of Moore Lewis Pharmacy in my most recent return. I scrolled further, found a copy of an email from their CPA, forwarded to me years ago for review. It read, of A's of restructuring, all profit disbursements and K1 reporting now filed under Moore Family Holdings per new partnership structure effective March 2019. There it was again. Moore Family Holdings, not Moore Lewis. My name, once printed beside hers, had vanished. No strike-a-through. No italics. Just absence. That's the thing about erasure. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It makes you doubt you were ever there. I sat still for a long time. The glow of the screen cast shadows across the dining room wall, across picture frames, empty chairs, a dusty vase that hadn't held flowers since Easter. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the buffet. Inside, a checkbook with my name. A calculator I hadn't used in ages, and tucked between them, an envelope from the pharmacy dated 2 years ago. Unopened. I hadn't thought much of it then. Probably another holiday newsletter. Now, I tore it open with careful fingers. Inside, a coupon for vitamins. A printed message that read "Wa thank our customers for their loyalty. Here's to the future." A no signature. No mention of founders. No trace of the woman who once opened the store by herself at 6 a.m. to fill antibiotics for a mother with 2 crying babies. I folded the letter once, then again, slid it back into the drawer. This wasn't just neglect. It was intentional. It was elegant, polite, and complete. They hadn't stolen my shares. They deleted me. I tried calling Stephanie the next morning, straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What would I say? You forgot to mention you erased me. You took the pharmacy and left me a coupon. Instead, I wrapped my coat tight and drove to the pharmacy. The old tan book coughed twice before the engine turned over. It was raining. Not a storm, just that Ohio drizzle that seeps into your sleeves and under your collar. Quiet and persistent, like shame. The windows of the store gleamed like polished glass in a museum. A new decal read, family, owned, community, trusted. I parked in the lot I used to sweep with a push broom every Sunday morning. Inside, the bell above the door jingled. Same sound, different feeling. A young woman I didn't recognize stood behind the counter. Her name tag read, Sierra. She glanced up, polite but detached. Hi there, can I help you? I used to work here, I said, trying to smile. I'm Marjorie? Her eyes flickered. A pause. Then, oh right. I think Stephanie mentioned you. A mentioned. Like a footnote. I asked if Donna still worked mornings. Donna had been with us since the grand opening. Sierra shook her head. She left last year, new baby. I nodded, throat dry. Tell Stephanie I stopped by. Sierra offered a neutral smile. Sure. I didn't ask to go to the back. Didn't ask to speak with anyone. I just left. Rain slicked the windshield as I drove home, wipers scraping like they were trying to clear more than water. I didn't cry, but I did talk to myself. Not out loud. Just in my head. Little questions that didn't need answers. Did I do too much? Or not enough? Was I too proud to ask where I stood? The house was dark when I got back. I didn't bother flipping on the lights. I made tea, left it untouched, put on the radio, static, then silence. It was 4:17 p.m. when the doorbell rang. I nearly didn't answer. No one visits anymore. But when I opened it, there she was, wet hair, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes like her father's. Hi, Aunt Marge. Ruth, 24, studying pharmacy at Ohio State, my brother's only daughter. Kind, bright, a little shy. She never visited unannounced. I know it's weird, she said, breathless from the cold. But I think we need to talk. I brought Ruth a towel and an old pair of socks. She sat at the kitchen table, damp hair curling at her shoulders, backpack dripping on the floor. The last time she visited, she'd helped me hang Christmas lights. We drank cider and laughed when the wreath fell, twice. Now, she looked like she'd come in from a war. I didn't mean to scare you, she said. Something didn't sit right. I poured her tea. Chamomile. The kind her mother used to make. She held the mug but didn't drink. Her fingers curled around it like she needed something solid. You're interning with a law office, right? I asked. She nodded. Small firm, mostly tax and estate stuff. We do filings for a bunch of LLCs around Columbus. Her voice dropped. Last week, I was compiling paperwork for a holding company. More family holdings. I saw the name, figured it might be coincidence. Then I saw the address. She pulled out a folded paper from her backpack, slid it across the table. I didn't touch it. Your name wasn't anywhere, Aunt Marge, she said. Not on the ownership structure. Not on the profit distribution. Not on the annual reports. I swallowed. It's complicated. Ruth shook her head, gently. I thought so too. That maybe you'd retired. Given it up willingly. She looked up then. But there's a clause. It says the original co-founder retains symbolic legacy value only. It sounded cold. The phrase stung. Symbolic legacy. Not even ownership. Just a footnote with flowers on top. I finally touched the paper. Not to read it. Just to ground myself. Ruth's eyes didn't leave mine. Aunt Marja. Did you know? My throat tightened. I wanted to lie. Say yes, say I was tired. That I didn't care anymore. But truth, once it cracks, has a way of flooding everything. I signed something, I said. Years ago. She told me it was for taxes. Ruth leaned back, hands dropping into her lap. I didn't want to believe it. She said. But they moved your name out, every trace. Legally. Quietly. It's like you were never there. I stared at the steam rising from her tea. Somehow it smelled too sweet. Like a memory I couldn't trust anymore. I was there. I said softly. Every morning. Every bottle. Every shelf. I know. Her voice caught. That was when I saw it. Not just concern. Anger. Not just pity. Allegiance. I don't know what you want to do, she said, voice steady. But if you want to fight this, I'll help you. If for a long second, I couldn't speak, not because I didn't have words, but because I hadn't heard, "You're not alone," in a very, very long time. The invitation came by text. Family dinner this Saturday, 6 p.m. Would love to see you. Short, punctuated with a heart emoji. I stared at it for a long time. No apology. No mention of Lakewood. No follow-up from the coffee shop conversation. Still, I said yes. Part of me, foolish or hopeful, wanted to believe that maybe this was her way of softening things, of making space again. Saturday came cold and clear. I wore my nicest cardigan, ironed my slacks, sprayed the perfume Henry used to love, lavender and something faintly citrus. I brought a lemon pie. Homemade. When I stepped into Stephanie's house, the smell of rosemary and garlic floated through the air. Children's voices drifted in from the living room, lauder. Piano keys out of tune. For a moment, I let myself smile. Janice answered the door. "Marjorie," she said, lips pursed but painted. "Oh, how lovely you made it." She didn't reach for the pie. Inside, the dining table gleamed with candles and silverware. 10 seats, one empty. Put her next to Emma, someone called. She likes the quiet. I wasn't sure who she was. I sat, smiled, waited. No one asked where the pie should go. It stayed on the counter, untouched. Stephanie floated from guest to guest, refilling wine, laughing softly. She kissed Janice's cheek, patted her arm, placed a bouquet of tulips in front of her place setting. "To Janice," Stephanie said, tapping her glass. "The glue that keeps this family sane." Everyone clinked their drinks. Except me. Janice beamed. "Oh goodness, I'm just the extra pair of hands. The real work is raising a daughter like this." They all laughed. I picked at my napkin. Halfway through the meal, a woman I didn't recognize leaned over and whispered, "Excuse me, are you the nanny?" I blinked. "No, I'm Stephanie's mother." She flushed. "Oh, I didn't realize." She didn't speak to me again. Later, when cake came out, I saw it before anyone said the words. White frosting, pink cursive. "To the heart of our home." Janice clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, Steph, you're too much." I looked down at my plate, still empty. And that's when Janice leaned toward me, smile wide, voice light. "You know, Marjorie, it's so lovely you're here. It must feel nice to visit, without having to worry about responsibilities anymore." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I wasn't sure which part hurt more. That she believed it, or that Stephanie didn't correct her. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Tell me, what would you do if your chair at the table slowly disappeared? I left before dessert was cleared. No one stopped me. No one noticed. I placed my coat over my arm, quiet, like a guest slipping out of a party she was never truly invited to. Outside, the air bit harder than when I'd arrived. My fingers stiffened around the pie dish, still untouched, not even moved from the counter. The car door creaked as I opened it. Inside, the silence was heavier than the cold. I sat for a moment, hands in my lap, headlights off. Stephanie used to hold my hand during doctor's visits. She was afraid of needles. Her tiny fingers would grip mine so tight. The circulation cut off. "Don't look," I'd say, blocking the view. "But you won't let go, right? Never." That was all she needed. Funny how some promises fade without even breaking. I drove home slowly. The roads were slick. A deer stood near the turn onto my street, still and watchful, like it knew something I didn't. The house was dark, as I'd left it. Ruth was on the porch. She stood when I pulled in, her breath fogging in the light. She didn't speak, just opened the door, took the dish from my hand, and followed me inside. I turned on the lamp near the sofa. It glowed yellow, soft and warm. "Was it awful?" she asked. I nodded once. She didn't press. We moved to the dining table. I pulled out the file folders, spreading them one by one. Bank printouts, tax forms, the original pharmacy deed, the email Ruth had brought, the paper I signed. Ruth sat across from me, sorting quietly. No commentary, no outrage. Just focus. I appreciated that. There's something sacred about being taken seriously, especially when the world has decided you're harmless. I held up the old business card, Moore Lewis Pharmacy. Est. 2007. It felt like looking at a photo of someone who no longer remembered your name. "Do you think this'll hold up?" I asked. Ruth didn't answer right away. She was reading a page, brow furrowed. Then she looked up. "With the right lawyer." "Yes," I nodded. Not because I felt triumphant, but because I finally felt anchored. "This won't fix the years I gave her." I whispered. "No," she said. "But it might remind her who gave them." We worked past midnight. No television, no music, just the rustle of paper and the soft clink of tea mugs. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. But inside, for the first time in weeks, maybe months, something held steady. Me. Margaret Chen's office sat above a florist shop in a brick building that smelled faintly of roses and paper. She greeted us with a firm handshake and eyes that missed nothing. Mid-60s, hair neatly pinned, glasses on a beaded chain. She reminded me of the head nurse I once worked under, precise, calm, and not easily fooled. We sat across from her desk. Ruth handed over the folders we'd prepared. Margaret didn't speak for several minutes as she reviewed each page. I watched her eyes move. Steady, trained. She finally looked up. "Mrs. Lewis," she said, "you understand what this document implies." I nodded. I signed it. But I didn't know what it cost. She tapped the line that had haunted me all week. Symbolic legacy value. "It's a legal term," she said. "But in practice, it's the financial equivalent of being thanked and erased." Ruth shifted beside me. "Can she challenge it?" Margaret considered that. "Depends. If there's proof of misrepresentation, especially to an elder family member, it could fall under elder financial abuse." Was she under duress? Was full information disclosed? Was there intent to deceive? I wasn't coerced. I admitted. Just trusted her. Margaret leaned forward. "Trust isn't a waiver of rights." She spoke it so clearly that something inside me flinched. Ruth reached into her folder again. "There's something else," she said. "This is a printout I wasn't supposed to see. Draft email between Stephanie's accountant and a lawyer." She slid it across the desk. Margaret read it once. Then again. Her mouth flattened. The line that stood out in bold was short and clean of. "Once the restructure is done, M. Lewis will no longer have any claim, on record or in perception." I stared at it. The font so ordinary. Like it was discussing a shelf being moved, or an expense category renamed, not a human being, not a mother. Margaret looked at me. "How long ago was this sent?" "March 2019, Ruth said. I did the math. That was 3 weeks after Stephanie brought chili and asked for my signature. "Your daughter," Margaret said carefully, "built a paper trail that positions you as non-essential, on purpose. I believe this was calculated." I didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of a stranger, but something in my ribcage turned cold. Not because I was surprised, because deep down I had suspected for a while. Can we fight it? Ruth asked again. Margaret nodded. Yes, but it won't be fast. And it won't be easy. I looked at Ruth, then back at the paper with my erased name. I don't need easy, I said. I just need the truth on record. Margaret offered a small smile. Then let's start rebuilding your place in it. I didn't sleep that night. Not for a minute. The clock ticked steady beside the bed. 1247 a 1K19 hours 2003. The moonlight stretched long shadows across the wall, bending around picture frames, across the closed door. Over the blanket I hadn't pulled up, I lay still, listening to the old house breathe. The silence was different now. It didn't comfort. It questioned. I turned to face the ceiling, arms folded tight across my chest. In the dark, memories arrive like old neighbors, uninvited, but familiar. Stephanie at 5, twirling in the hallway in her 2 big ballet shoes. Stephanie at 12, clutching her first paycheck from the pharmacy with wide eyes. Stephanie at 26, hugging me outside the grand opening, whispering, I couldn't have done this without you. Had that version of her ever really left, or had I just held onto it too tightly? At 11 a.m., I swung my legs over the bed. The floor was cold. I didn't bother with slippers. I walked to the kitchen. The house creaked as I moved. I didn't flip on the overhead light, just the under-cabinet lamp, soft and yellow. I pulled open the drawer by the fridge, found a pad of lined paper, a pen, sat down at the table I'd bought from a thrift store in 1983, took a breath, and wrote, This is my record, sis my version. Before they write me out for good I wrote slowly. The words didn't come easy, not at first. But once they did, they arrived like a river cracking through dry ground. I wrote about the double shifts, the canned soup years, the nights I rubbed Stephanie's back until she stopped crying after her father died. I wrote about the loan I took to keep the pharmacy afloat in year 2, the time I stayed overnight during a snowstorm to restock insulin, the first Christmas we gave out free cough syrup to families who couldn't afford it. Not one of those stories had ever made it onto the website's About Us page. I kept writing. Until my hand cramped. Until my eyes blurred. Until the sun began to bleed faint light over the edge of the neighbor's roof. Then I folded the pages. Placed them in an envelope. Wrote 3 words on the front. Cause in case needed, not for the courts. For the truth. I didn't know if I'd ever read it aloud, but I knew one thing. If they'd spent years rewriting me out of their version, I'd be damned if I let that be the only version that remained. The morning came gray and slow. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. There's a strange kind of energy that comes after truth settles in. Not fire. Not fury. Just a calm sort of certainty. By the time Ruth arrived, I'd already boiled water, set out 2 mugs, and laid the folder in the center of the kitchen table like a blueprint. She raised her eyebrows when she saw it. You didn't sleep, did you? I shook my head. No point in resting when the record's been blank too long. She smiled gently and opened her laptop. We'll need copies of everything, she said. Tax records, emails, partnership contracts. And we need a statement from you, something clear. In your words. Already done. I slid the envelope across the table. Her expression shifted when she opened it. She didn't read every word, just enough to know it was real, it was detailed, it was mine. That's a good start, she whispered. While she typed, I went to the living room, opened my purse, and fished out an old wallet I hadn't used in years. Tucked in one of the creased pockets, folded 3 times, was a note. From Henry. Dated April 1996. I'd forgotten it was there. He'd left it in my lunchbox once during my overnight hospice shift. I hadn't thrown it away because, well, you don't throw away the last thing someone says to you. It read when you feel erased, write yourself back in. Quietly. Then show them. I sat on the edge of the recliner, holding that scrap like it might vanish. All these years, I thought I'd held on for nostalgia. Turns out I was holding instructions. I brought it back to the kitchen, laid it beside Ruth's laptop. She read it, then looked at me differently. Not with pity, with alignment. We worked all morning. Ruth listed contacts: Margaret, the CPA, even a former pharmacy supplier who still remembered me. We drafted a formal complaint. Nothing wild, nothing angry, just facts and timestamps. While Ruth typed, I scanned. While she emailed, I brewed more tea. It was quiet. Focused, not war. Restoration at noon. The sun finally broke through the cloud layer. A pale light spilled across the kitchen tiles. My shadow fell across the papers, long and steady. It didn't disappear, not this time. By mid-afternoon, the sky had cleared. Ruth had gone back to campus with a flash drive and a folder of duplicates. Margaret was expecting her by 5. But I had one thing left to do. I gathered the originals. The notarized documents, the signed affidavit, my handwritten statement, and slipped them into a manila envelope, taped it shut carefully. Wrote the address in my neatest cursive, like I was sending something sacred. And maybe I was. The walk to the post office was 6 blocks, a route I knew by heart. I used to push Stephanie in a stroller down that same sidewalk, her little feet kicking and her hand pointing at birds. Back then, I was the engine, the destination. Today I just walked. No music. No rush. The wind cut through my sleeves, but I didn't pull my coat tighter. Let the cold in. It made me feel awake. The automatic doors of the post office slid open with a tired sigh. Inside, the line was short. Fluorescent lights buzzed above me like bees that had nowhere else to go. When it was my turn, the clerk was someone I recognized. Gordon, 70-something. Former school bus driver. Ran the front desk here part-time since his wife passed. He took the envelope from my hands, squinted at the label. Shen and Associates, he said. Legal stuff. I nodded. He smiled. Still fighting. Marjorie. I met his eyes. No, I said, voice even. Just correcting. He stamped the package. Slid it into the outgoing bin. Certified. Wes. Always. The receipt slid across the counter. I folded it once, tucked it inside my coat. On the walk home, the wind had shifted. It was at my back now, pushing instead of resisting. I passed the corner where the pharmacy used to give out free flu shots in folding chairs. I remembered handing out ginger chews to kids and tissues to nervous parents. I passed the school where Stephanie had once performed in a winter play, dressed as a snowflake, eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. I passed a woman standing by her porch, trying to get her mail out of a frozen box. She gave me a nod. I nodded back. Everything looked the same, and yet not. The sidewalk under my shoes felt steadier. I wasn't drifting anymore. I was walking with weight. When I reached my front steps, I paused, one foot still on the last slab of sidewalk, then climbed slowly, steadily, like someone with purpose. Inside, I placed the coat on its hook, boiled water, sat back down at the table where the folders had been. It was empty now. But I wasn't. The call came on a Wednesday. I was folding laundry, radio humming something from the 60s. The phone buzzed 3 times before I picked it up. Stephanie's name blinked on the screen. For a moment, I just looked at it, then answered. Her voice was tight, breathless. Mom, what the hell is this? No hello, no pause. I waited. You sent a lawyer after me, a formal complaint. Are you serious? Still, I didn't speak. I let her keep going. I mean, Jesus, Mom, what are you trying to do? Embarrass me. Destroy everything I've worked for. I could have laughed. But I didn't. I walked to the kitchen, put the phone on speaker, stirred the pot of soup on the stove, chicken and rice, my late husband's favorite. She kept going. You didn't even call me. Didn't ask for a meeting. Just sent legal threats like I'm some stranger. I stirred twice, slowly. Then spoke. I gave you the foundation. The silence on the line was instant. I let it sit a beat longer. Then, now I'm taking back the silence. She sucked in a breath. I can't believe you do this, she said, lower now. You know this could ruin me. I think we're past belief, Stephanie. She said my name again, smaller. Mom, and this time, it almost worked. That voice, that ache, the old hook of guilt, but I didn't bite. You made your choices, I said. I'm making mine. Then I hung up. Not angry, just done. I sat down, breathed in the scent of broth and thyme, felt my own heartbeat. Not fast, not shaky. Just steady. Later that afternoon, Ruth arrived with updates. The notice went through. We've got an appointment to freeze assets tied to your original ownership. Margaret says the paperwork is clean. Very clean, actually. She hesitated. Almost too clean. Meaning someone had tried to wipe things completely. Ruth pulled out a printed email. It's from 2 years ago. Subject line says, minimize maternal conflict exposure. It was forwarded from Stephanie's husband's account to their financial planner. She looked at me, hesitant. Do you want to read it? I shook my head. No need. What do we do next? She asked. I looked out the window. Snow was starting again. Just flurries, soft and silent. Now, I said. We make sure there's a record. A legal one. No, I said. A truthful one. That evening, Ruth set the microphone on the kitchen table. Simple. Round. No wires. All you have to do, she said gently, is talk. I stared at the blinking red light. My reflection shimmered faintly in the steel. I'd spent years speaking for others. Comforting patients, training nurses, explaining prescriptions to nervous parents. But this was the first time I spoke to keep my own story from vanishing. Ruth hit record. State your name, please, she prompted softly. Marjorie Ellen Lewis. And your relation to Moore Lewis Pharmacy. I co-founded it in 2007, purchased the original lease with savings from 3 decades of hospice nursing. Managed day-to-day operations for 10 years. Co-signed every early inventory loan and trained the current owner, my daughter. The words came slow, measured, not emotional, not angry, just true. We recorded for almost 30 minutes. Facts, dates, patterns. At the end, Ruth paused. Do you want to say anything else? For the record. I looked at the mic, then said, I gave my daughter a business, a name, and the strength to stand on her own. I didn't expect repayment. But I did expect not to be erased. Ruth clicked stop. We sat in silence for a moment. Then the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting a robocall. But the voice on the other end made my spine straighten. Mrs. Lewis. This is Donna. I used to work at the pharmacy. Before Janice came in every day. Donna, I said. It's good to hear from you. She hesitated. I heard there's legal stuff happening. I just wanted to say, if you need a statement or anything, I kept records. Pay changes, shift logs. The day your name came off the payroll system, I printed the report. I swallowed. You kept it. Something felt wrong. I didn't know what to do then. But now I think I do. I thanked her, told her someone would be in touch. After I hung up, I turned to Ruth. They erased me so thoroughly, I said. They didn't think anyone would remember. But they do, she said. One by one. That night, I lit a candle in the living room. Not for prayer. Not for ceremony, just to mark the moment. Some stories end in noise, others in silence. Mine was just beginning again, with light. What would you do if the people who built their lives on you tried to erase you from theirs? The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No gallery rows, no dramatic lighting, just beige walls, 2 tables, a judge with tired eyes, and the low hum of air conditioning that sounded like it hadn't been cleaned since 1995. I sat beside Margaret, my palms folded in my lap. She wore a gray blazer and a calm expression I'd come to trust. Her briefcase rested open, tabs like soldiers in formation, evidence, testimony, precedent. Stephanie sat across the aisle. Next to her, her husband whispered something into the ear of their attorney, a man with a slick haircut and a smug confidence that looked rehearsed. Stephanie didn't look at me. She looked past me. That told me everything I needed to know. The clerk called the case. Voices settled. Judge McKinley adjusted his glasses. Petitioner, Marjorie Ellen Lewis, seeking preliminary injunction and partial asset freeze pending civil review. Respondents, Stephanie Moore and Moore Family Holdings. He looked up. As everyone present. Margaret stood. Yes, Your Honor. So did the other lawyer. Yes, Your Honor. Though we're surprised by the nature of these allegations. Margaret's tone never wavered. Then it's a good thing we brought receipts. She handed the judge a binder. One I'd watched her build, night after night. Stephanie's lawyer objected. We've had no time to review this. The accusations are vague. Margaret opened a folder. On the contrary, they are precise. Documented transfers of financial ownership without full disclosure. Disbursements that bypassed the original co-founder. An affidavit from a former employee showing payroll manipulation. I felt Stephanie stiffen across the aisle. Her lawyer raised a hand. Your Honor, we'd like to request a dismissal on the grounds that Mrs. Lewis voluntarily signed the restructuring. She signed a page. Margaret cut in. That was misrepresented to her, a 66-year-old co-founder. With no counsel, no full financial disclosures, the judge raised an eyebrow. Did the respondents provide financial updates post-transfer? Silence. Stephanie's mouth opened, but her lawyer answered first. We believed it was unnecessary due to the informal nature of the relationship. That word, informal, landed like a thud. Margaret smiled thinly, which is why Mrs. Lewis received a nursing home deposit instead of a dividend check. The judge nodded once. Let's proceed. Stephanie finally spoke, her voice low and cool. Mom, this didn't have to go this way. I met her eyes. They were tired. But not sorry. I gave you everything, I said. And you tried to file me under miscellaneous. Her husband shifted in his chair. Stephanie leaned forward slightly. You're ruining the business. No, I said. I'm reminding it where it came from. The room went still. Even the hum of the vent seemed to pause. Margaret cleared her throat. Your Honor, we respectfully request a temporary freeze on all pharmacy profits, distributed under Moore Family Holdings until a full forensic review is conducted. The judge scribbled something on his pad. I'll review these documents. A decision will be filed within 72 hours. He banged the gavel once, soft, almost symbolic. Court adjourned. No fireworks, just the echo of shoes on linoleum as everyone stood. Stephanie walked past without a glance. Her husband muttered something to their attorney. I didn't follow. Didn't turn. I just exhaled. Not victory. Not yet. But something like it. The call came the next morning. I let it ring twice before answering. Stephanie's voice was calm this time, strained at the edges, but without the sharpness I'd heard before. Mom, she said. Can we talk? I sat by the window, the sun just beginning to rise, spreading pale light across my coffee mug and the folder still sitting on the kitchen table. I think we already did, I said. No, she murmured. I mean without lawyers. Just us. I waited. She sighed. This has all gotten too far. For everyone. I didn't think it would get here. You didn't think I'd stand up, I said. Silence. Then, I just wanted things to be simple. For who? Another pause, longer this time. Then the shift. We can fix this, she said. We can restructure, again. Maybe revisit the partnership language. Just not in front of strangers. I looked out the window. A cardinal landed on the wire. Red against gray. Justice isn't personal, Stephanie, I said softly. It's overdue. She said my name again. Once. Then nothing. I hung up, and for the first time in a long while, I felt nothing hollow afterward. Not guilt. Not grief. Just breath. Steady in my chest. 3 days later, the court decision arrived. A white envelope. Thick. Certified. Ruth sat beside me as I opened it. Her eyes scanned faster than mine. She reached the bottom before I'd finished the second paragraph. They granted it, she said. The asset freeze and temporary restoration of your co-ownership status. I nodded. No tears. Just that quiet click of things falling into place. The ruling wasn't dramatic. It didn't punish. It didn't praise. But it acknowledged me. In writing. On record. And that alone meant everything. I walked to the living room. Placed the envelope in the file cabinet beneath Henry's photo. The one where we're dancing barefoot in the backyard, holding lemonade and laughing like the whole world was ours. Thank you, I whispered to the frame. You were right. Ruth appeared in the doorway. You okay? I turned to her. I will be. That night, we didn't celebrate. No toasts. No fanfare. Just tea and an old movie. And a fire that crackled like approval. Later, alone in bed, I stared at the ceiling, thought about how long it takes to lose a name, and how quiet it can be when you take it back. The world outside stayed still, but something in me, finally, had moved forward. The text came 2 mornings after the ruling. Just one line from Stephanie. "You've changed everything." No greeting, no sign off, not a question, just blame, wrapped in punctuation. I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. I didn't need to archive shame anymore. Later that day, Ruth told me Monica had blocked my number. Not that I'd planned to call. A few cousins, names I hadn't seen in my inbox in years, started sending vague messages. "So much drama lately, hope you're okay. Let's catch up soon." I didn't reply. I'd spent too many years accepting breadcrumbs and calling it family. Now I'd learned silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's boundary. On Thursday, I pulled my coat on and walked the 4 blocks to the pharmacy. Not to make a scene, not even to go inside, just to see it, to see what I had built. The sign still read, "More, Lewis, now," at least temporarily, per the court's decision, but the font had changed. Sleeker, colder. The windows were gleaming, a new poster in the corner, now offering wellness consultations with Janice Moore. Of course, I didn't go in. I didn't need to. But as I turned to leave, a woman coming out paused when she saw me. Late 60s, blue windbreaker, paper bag in hand. She looked at me, really looked, and smiled. "You used to help my mother here," she said. "Years ago. When she was sick, you stayed late one night to explain her prescriptions. She talked about you for months." I blinked, then smiled back. "Thank you," I said. "No," she replied. "Thank you." As she walked off, I stood there for a while. The wind tugged at my collar. No parade, no grand welcome. Just a single thank you, unprompted and honest. And sometimes, that's the real justice. Recognition, not by court order, not by signatures, but by memory. I turned and headed home, the sidewalk steady beneath my feet, the winter sun soft on my back. And behind me, the place I helped build, still standing. The house was quiet when I got home. Afternoon light slanted through the blinds, soft and golden, stretching across the kitchen table where the manila folders still sat, neatly stacked, but not yet closed. I made tea. Just 1 cup, then I pulled out the small recorder Ruth had used, plugged in my headphones, sat down, and pressed play. At first, the sound startled me, my own voice echoing back, clear and low. I expected it to feel foreign, like hearing an old message left on an answering machine. But it didn't. It sounded honest, worn but steady. I listened to myself say my full name, my history, the dates, the hours, the things I gave. I listened to the line I had almost whispered when Ruth asked for a closing statement. "Beth, I gave my daughter a business, a name, and the strength to stand on her own. I didn't expect repayment, but I did expect not to be erased." Thus the sentence landed differently when I heard it back. Not softer, stronger. It wasn't a plea. It was a record. Somewhere around the 10-minute mark, my voice cracked briefly, talking about the first time Stephanie called me. The glue. Behind the scenes. And then never again. But even that crack didn't waver long. By the end, I sat still, headphones warm against my ears, hands wrapped around a half-full mug. The final seconds ticked out. Then silence. Not the kind I used to dread. Not the lonely kind. Just stillness. I took the headphones off, stared at the recorder for a moment. Then stood. I gathered the printouts, the court documents, the handwritten testimony, the business deed copy. I slid them into a new envelope, labeled it in Penzendar's final record, MELRS's 3 initials. Small, quiet. But they felt like mine again. I opened the file cabinet, shifted aside old bank slips, and placed the envelope inside. Beside Henry's VA papers, the deed to the house, and a yellowed birth certificate with Stephanie's footprints in ink. I closed the drawer slowly. With purpose. No ceremony. No music swelling in the background. Just the click of metal, clean and sure. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't holding my story in for someone else's comfort. I was placing it where it belonged, in my hands, on my terms, and when the time came, whether for court, for Ruth, or just for clarity. It would speak, in my voice. It had been 32 days since the ruling. The snow had mostly melted, leaving damp patches along the fence and tufts of tired grass, beginning to breathe again. I spent my mornings trimming the rosemary bush that refused to die. Afternoons, I read old mystery novels on the porch, wrapped in the same shawl I'd had since Henry was alive. Ruth visited every Saturday. We made tea. Didn't talk about court. Just garden plans and her graduation. Stephanie never called again. I hadn't expected her to. Then, one Thursday, around 5, there was a knock at the door. Not firm. Not frantic, just soft. I opened it. Emma stood there, 17, taller than I remembered, cheeks pink from the wind, a brown paper bag in one hand, a small envelope in the other. "Hi," she said, voice unsure. "I hope this isn't weird." I stepped aside. "It's only weird if you don't come in." She smiled, relieved. In the kitchen, she placed the bag on the table. "Banana bread, still warm." "I made it myself," she said, mossly. I poured tea. She didn't add sugar. We sat. The envelope stayed beside her untouched. She looked around the room like it held something important she couldn't name. "I didn't know if I should come," she said. "But I wanted to." I let the silence fill the space between us. Then she added, almost too quiet, "I just wanted to see the woman they never really described." I looked at her, really looked. She had her mother's chin, but her father's eyes. And in them, uncertainty, yes, but something else too, willingness. I nodded. "Well," I said, "you found her." She smiled. "We didn't speak of lawyers, or money, or nursing homes, just books, her favorite teachers, how she wanted to study art history, but wasn't sure if it was practical. I told her practicality was overrated." She laughed, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't echo off a hollow wall. It stayed. Emma stood up just as the sky began to bruise into evening. "I should go," she said, reaching for her coat. I nodded, not wanting to press. Not wanting to end it either. At the door, she hesitated, then pulled a small envelope from her jacket pocket and handed it to me. "You don't have to read it now," she said, "or ever." I nodded again. She hugged me, quick but real, then left. The wind caught the edge of her coat as she stepped off the porch. She didn't look back, but she didn't hurry either. I closed the door softly. The house felt still, but not empty. I didn't open the envelope right away. I rinsed the mugs, wiped down the table, put the banana bread in a tin for later. Then I poured a fresh cup of tea, carried it to the back porch, sat down with the letter in my lap. The sky was low now, streaked with orange and ash. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a note card. No decoration, no signature on the front. I unfolded it. The handwriting was neat. Not practiced, just honest. "I believe you, and I think maybe I needed to hear it in your voice, not theirs." That was it. No apology needed. Just a choice, to listen, to think for herself, to say, even in silence, "You're not invisible here." I pressed the card to my chest for a moment, then set it on the table beside the tea. The rosemary bush rustled behind me. A squirrel darted along the fence line. Somewhere across the yard, wind chimes rang, soft and sure. I stood, walked down the steps, across the grass still slick from last night's dew. Stood at the edge of the garden, hands resting on the old fence Henry once built. The boards were gray now, worn, but still standing. The sunlight touched my shoulder, warm through the wool. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a chapter someone else had closed. I felt like a page still being written. And this time, the pen was mine. I once thought growing old meant fading out, becoming a burden, a whisper behind closed doors. But I've learned something far quieter, and far truer. You don't disappear just because someone stops looking at you. You don't become less real because someone else rewrites your story. The truth stays, in records, in memory, in the hands that built the home, in the name carved into the sign, in the child who comes back, not to apologize, but to see you for the first time. I didn't get revenge. I got something better. A name returned, a voice remembered, and a garden growing beneath my feet. This wasn't the ending I planned, but it's the legacy I choose. And now, I'm wondering about you. Have you ever had to reclaim your voice after someone tried to silence your worth? Tell me below. Your story matters too.